the average doctoral student or grad student is graduating with about $100,000 to $150,000 in debt, and that's nationwide. And unfortunately, this program, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, a lot of people are unaware of first what the program even is and whether they even qualify. And it's funny because I speak a lot to colleagues, professors who work in the field of higher education that may even qualify for this program and are even in these notable positions, professor, and they have no idea what this program is even available to them.
Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. This is where we discuss all things related to the doctoral journey. On this show, I share personal stories and bring some friends along for revealing conversations about their journey and provide inspiration for others to level up as doc students. I'm your host, Dr. Emanuela Stanislaus. I'm a doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working full-time, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life. And now I'm on a mission to create community for other women of color to complete their doctoral degrees. This is real talk to help you along your doctoral journey. Now, let's get to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emanuela Stanislaus, and today we are changing it up a little bit. This is the podcast for women of color, doctoral students, and today I have brought in a male-identifying guest here to share some important knowledge that I think would apply for any doctoral students. So I am breaking my own rules. Today, I have Alberto Juan Diaz Jr., who is a seasoned financial aid professional with over 9 years of experience. Alberto is currently the Assistant Director of Financial Assistance at the Florida International University Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine, and he's been in that role since 2015. Alberto attended FIU, earning his bachelor's degree in public administration, which is similar to what I did, and his master's in higher education administration. He is currently a fifth-year Ph.D. candidate in higher education administration, and his dissertation examines medical students' understanding and debt experiences. So welcome, Alberto.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be your first male participant, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited for this conversation. And just so everybody knows, I have known Alberto since he started in his program because I graduated from the same higher ed program at FIU. We're both working full time while pursuing our doctoral degrees. And hopefully by the time this episode airs, he will be defending and will be Dr. Diaz. And I can't wait to call you that.
That is what I'm looking forward to over the past 5 years. So I'm super excited, and I hope that's the case as well. So hopefully the advertisement is Dr. Diaz presenting or whatever the case may be. So thank you for having me again.
No problem. Sending good vibes to you. And so, today, I just want to jump right into this important conversation. As I shared before, your background is extensive. You work in the financial aid area, especially for folks who graduate with large amounts of debt, right? And the audience is doctoral students, and I wanted to talk about this public service loan forgiveness, which is getting a lot of attention these days, particularly since the Biden administration has rolled out some changes with that. And so I wanted to see if you can talk a little bit about the public service loan forgiveness program and maybe share some of those key changes that folks should know a little bit more about.
Sure. So, you bring up a great point, and with regards to doctoral students specifically, the average doctoral student or grad student is graduating with about $100,000 to $150,000 in debt, and that's nationwide. And unfortunately, this program, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, a lot of people are unaware of first what the program even is and whether they even qualify. And it's funny because I speak a lot to colleagues, professors who work in the field of higher education that may even qualify for this program and are even in these notable positions, professor, and they have no idea what this program is even available to them. And they're carrying these big student debt burdens from undergrad and even going into their grad programs. So just to give you a background on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, it was actually created back in 2007. It was part of the College Cost Reduction and Access Act of 2007. And basically what that act stated said anyone who has a direct federal student loan who's made 120 qualifying monthly payments under a qualifying repayment plan while working full time in a qualifying employer will have their loans forgiven after 10 years. The great part about that is that after 10 years, your loans are forgiven and they're also tax-free. So whatever they forgive, it's tax-free and it goes away. Currently, the program has about, just to give you a background, 1.3 million borrowers that are currently signed up for the program, with about $131 million in outstanding balances. So these are individuals who, as of today, have already told the federal government, I'm going to pursue public service loan forgiveness. And the big thing behind this program was they wanted to emphasize the importance of public service, right? Making sure that individuals wanted to pursue and work in the public field, be competitive with the private market. There's a few qualifying requirements behind our criterias. One of them, you must be employed in a U.S. federal, state, local, or tribal government, or in a not-for-profit organization that's labeled a 501c3. That's the Internal Revenue Code that the employer must be for you to qualify. You must work full-time for this agency or organization. You do have to have direct student loans. There's a difference between direct student loans and prior loans that the federal government used to provide to students. So students are required to consolidate if they want to qualify for public service to be able to be kind of transition into the direct loan system. And you must repay your loans under an income-driven plan or a standard plan, and again, making 120 payments. The issue behind that is there's been a lot of bad reputation behind public service loan forgiveness. I'm sure many of you have read. NPR has put out a few articles on this, the New York Times and CNN. There's been some research behind this, academic research. The main issue behind this, there's a poor approval rate. There's been I think the headline for NPR was 99% have been denied. Majority of the issues were the rollout of the program. And what occurred is when the program was rolled out in 2007, like most things, unfortunately, with some things in the federal government, they're rolled out very quickly. And sometimes you don't have a chance to educate yourself before having to provide this information to others. And this occurred to both financial aid officers, lenders, you name it. They had to learn the process, learn the program, and explain it back to individuals. And unfortunately, that caused a little bit of some issues for those that are trying to get approved now after 10 years. I will say this past August 2020, the majority of the application denials were just that people weren't 56% were not in qualifying payments or didn't make enough qualifying payments. About 25% had just incomplete applications. They were missing something in their application. And about 14 they were in ineligible loans. They weren't in the proper federal direct loans, which caused a lot of issues for individuals to get approved. When it comes to how does this work or how do you apply, and I think this is the biggest step that I think people miss out on, is you do have to fill out a form and a certification of employment, employer certification to state that you are working for a 501c3 or a local, state, or federal organization. And that's kind of what starts the ball rolling, right, for people to get approved. It does, once you submit it, it does go to the federal system and they go ahead and send it to a lender. If you haven't reached the 120 qualifying payments as of yet, basically they transfer you to a lender who specifies in PSLF. For many of you on the call or on the podcast, if you are in the current process with public service loan forgiveness, your loans are probably with Fed Loans, which is one of the primary servicers for the program. However, recently they have declined to continue their services with the federal government, and they are going to transition your loans to probably another lender. Don't be surprised if this happens in the next few months, though there is a current movement to switch these out, probably grandfather some people in, but they will be transferred to other lenders in the next few months. So once that form is submitted, the lender is supposed to take a look at your file and state, okay, you've made this many payments over this long of a period in a qualifying employer. So you have, let's assume, 60 payments that have qualified. You still have 60 more to go. At that point, you just have to continue to update the lender with, if you change your employer to another state, local, or federal organization, to let them know that you are continue to be in the public service field. The great part about public service loan forgiveness, you don't have to do it consecutively. So if an individual, for instance, works 4 years in the public service and decides to make a quick change for a couple of years into the private market, they can do that and pick up right back where they left off. They return to the public service. So that's something a lot of people are unaware of. They think that if they leave the program, they no longer qualify, and that's not necessarily the case. So that's just a few things I think people should be aware of. Now, there has been significant changes to the program, specifically this past year, October 6, 2021 to be exact. Like Emanuela was stating, the Biden administration came back, and in an effort to help with loan forgiveness, they actually gave what they called a PSLF waiver in a kind of restricted time frame, where they stated that anyone who was in the public service field but was in the incorrect payment plan or incorrect loan type still would qualify for public service. So they kind of opened up the floodgates for people to apply to the program in a temporary basis to actually qualify and hopefully benefit from this program. So individuals that probably were in the incorrect payment plan for the past 10 years can now probably get their loans forgiven after everything, which is phenomenal. And I think that anyone on this podcast should take advantage of that. If you haven't, so make sure you're submitting your application. Even if you're unsure if you qualify, I would recommend going in and applying for the program and see if you do end up having some qualifying payments towards your student loans.
Wow, that was a lot of information. I learned a lot, and I think I told you before we started recording that I was trying to figure out this whole thing for myself too, and it was just so complicated. And it's really confusing to me that you shared that they created this process to make public service more appealing, but they make it so complicated for people to go through the process and to qualify. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on why. I guess because they want their money, but right, and they don't want to forgive everyone's loans. But why do you think it's so complicated? But then also, to, like you said, your last tip was everyone should apply. Where should people start first? Like, how should they apply? What website? And I'll definitely try and add these as links for folks to see and be able to start the process.
Sure. So I'll give my personal thoughts on the reason why they make it so difficult. I think a lot of it, unfortunately, is getting financial aid officers buy-in and intake before these policies go into place. I think that was a big mistake when they first rolled this out. I think, politicians, get together, they put out these bills. And while I think the idea behind PSLF is honorable, and I think it's an amazing program, and I think the idea behind it was to make sure that we promote this public service kind of influx into our world, I think that they didn't think about the administrative kind of background to it, right? And how burdensome the application itself can be. And this happens a lot I think at the federal level with especially federal aid. It happened with the FAFSA application, where FAFSA was super complicated. I remember the time that it used to be paper form and people had to fill it out, and your parents had to fill it out, and you had to turn in tax information. And over the years, they've noticed that those burdens are huge on families that are either first generation, for instance, or first time in college, and they struggle with those things. And since then, the FAFSA application has been simplified, and they continue to simplify it. Currently, public service loan forgiveness, there's a conversation at the federal level where once this time limited period they have for the waiver is over, there has been talks of the Department of Education passing it on to Congress to review this program and state, is it working? Kind of doing an evaluation. Is it working? What's complicated? Why is it not kind of working out for people to apply? And what's making it difficult for them? Let's streamline it. I will state in the defense of the program, and to your point, they have worked on some tools and kind of auxiliary information for individuals to use to benefit from the program, right? Or to be able to understand a little bit more about the program. And so everyone should visit studentaid.gov. That's the starting point, right? That is the federal system or federal website that actually gives you all the information you need about public service loan forgiveness. And under, I believe it's called Manage Loans, is a tab that you would kind of click on, and you can actually click public service loan forgiveness. And it gives you everything you need to know about the program. Recently, they've rolled out within the past year or two the PSLF help tool. So this is kind of a guide that you can log into the system and actually walks you through the process of filling out the paperwork. So basically, it'll ask you first to pull your personal information. And we were talking about this right before we started recording, how like just even having the right information ready to apply can be daunting. So one of the main things that they ask you for first is you have to create the student aid account. And if you don't have one, you may have done this when you were an undergrad or a grad student for FAFSA purposes, but they still ask you to go ahead and fill it out once again. And they may tell you, it'll take 24 hours to activate you once back into the account. So that's the first thing. You need to get in. Once you get in, then it's going to actually pull your whole history of all your student loans. So it's going to give you a historical perspective of what you've currently borrowed with whoever lender it is. And then it's going to ask you to go ahead and at that point, you're going to verify who you believe your employer is, right? One thing that they do ask for on there, so have this handy, is a W-2 form if you've been working for the past few years, or if you've worked in other places that are public service, you want to pull up your W-2 forms. They are going to ask you for the EIN number of the organization. This is just for them to verify if they're a qualifying employer. If they're not, they'll tell you no, they're not qualifying. If they are, they'll say yes. And there's some that they say, I'm not sure. So those are interesting ones. I would still submit your application. And what would occur is once you go ahead and they confirm whatever your employer is, they'll print out a form for you to submit to your employer, which is the employment verification form. And it has your history of your loans and everything on it. So you would submit that to somebody in usually your HR department would be probably the right person to fill out that application for you. I work mainly with medical students, so I usually tell them to go talk to their resident directors. So it really depends who you're going to be reaching out to. So that would be the main resource that I would utilize. And again, the PSLF Help Tool, I think it's a new addition to helping people be a little bit more informed about the program and helping them kind of walk through the different steps that they have to go through to qualify for the program.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I know personally I'm going to have to try and use that help tool. And I think you bring up a good point in terms of being prepared with all of those documents, because they do ask you about everything and you're like, wait, how do I get a hold of that information? So Thank you very much for that. I wanted to see if you can share maybe, some of the common mistakes that people make. I know you shared a little bit before, but don't know if you have some others that can, help folks when they're thinking about applying for this.
Yeah, I think anecdotally speaking, right, this is not looking at anything, it's just my experience working with students. I think the biggest mistake I see with both alum and students currently going into the program is signing up for the wrong repayment plan. Right now, again, with the temporary waiver, everything's free game, right? So it doesn't matter what payment plan you're in. But if they do go back to the old way of the program, which is that you have to be in a qualifying payment plan and in a qualifying employer, a lot of people, unfortunately, kind of go for those payment plans that pay the least, right? And it's just part of the hustle, right? The daily hustle, right? We're in an expensive economy. Some of us are still early on in our careers. So you try to still kind of make your way through it. And unfortunately, a lot of people sign up for the payment plan that's the lowest payment, right? Minimum payment. That could be sometimes the graduate extended payment, which, in the surface on a monthly basis is probably the most economical, but in the long run, it's actually the most expensive. However, because again, we're trying to make ends meet, we run into that issue where we unfortunately sign up for the wrong payment plan, and we don't realize kind of how detrimental that is in the future, right? So anyone who signed up for that payment plan and has worked for let's say an employer for 10 years already and has been making qualifying payments, they missed out. And if it wasn't for the waiver, they would never get their loans forgiven. And I think that's the biggest mistake I've seen. And I understand it. I understand it to the point of like people have to try to live. So they make their minimum payments and they try to work on it. But my suggestion would be to try to sign up minimally for an income-based plan. I think those are the best ones out there. There's repay as you earn and pay as you earn. Those two payment plans are probably, they both qualify for public service loan forgiveness, and they look at 10% of your take-home pay. So that's how they determine what your qualifying payment will look like. So that would be my suggestion for the common mistake, and also the suggestion to how to kind of combat that, right? Sign up for maybe an income-based plan. Beyond that, I think the second one, and mostly it's just a matter of whether your loans qualify. And I think most people who've taken out loans over the past, I think 12, 15 years, give and take, would qualify for public service. So I think they will be okay unless you went to college or undergrad or even your doctoral program sometime in the early 2000s. Then at that point, you would have to consolidate your loans. So that would be the only other common mistake I've seen over my tenure here.
Wow, yeah, I am learning so much. I appreciate you coming on to share this information. I know too, you mentioned the waiver being in place right now. Do you know how long the waiver is expected to last or be available for folks?
So the waiver is actually active again as of October 6th of 2021, and it expires on October 31st of 22. So sometime at the end of this year, closer to the end of the year, everyone would have to submit their applications to qualify for the waiver. So again, I think I will say that the Department of Education and the lenders have provided feedback saying to please be patient for those that submit their waivers, because of course they are backlogged at this very moment, which is understandable with the amount of people I'm sure that are showing interest and really want to get their loans forgiven. The main thing is, and my recommendation to anyone on this podcast is follow up, follow up, follow up. You can never take anyone's unfortunately word for granted. I recommend typically individuals to use chat functions whenever you discuss anything federal loaned with any lender, just because there's a transcript. You can actually save that transcript after you finish talking to a representative. Even though their calls are recorded, I always feel more comfortable with a transcript in hand. So that would be one recommendation, especially when you're working or discussing PSLF. And then, of course, making sure you're keeping track of every interaction you have. So I usually tell my students, keep a log, right? I called this individual, this lender on this day at this time, and we discussed the following. This is the message I received, because it is going to be helpful for you in the future, especially if you have to make any kind of arguments or claims regarding PSLF. So another common mistake I think that people make, and this is more of just like a public service announcement, I'll call it, be very careful with companies that are out there. There are a lot of predatory companies out there right now that are trying to make a dime on this process. The public service loan forgiveness is a free process that you don't have to pay to apply for the program. And I know there's companies out there that are trying to have people pay them a subscription or pay them a kind of a finder fee or whatever you want to call it. So just be careful. There are people out there trying to make a dollar on you. And of course, you're also giving these individuals your information. That's not to say that some of these companies aren't real and they're out there to, of course, they're making money on it, but they are going to get you through the process. So I would just do your due diligence and kind of doing your research on these companies and these individuals. But ultimately speaking, I think this is a process that most individuals can pursue public service on their own. They can do the application process, and that's also what the lenders are there for. If you're in an institution still and you're still working on your doc work, go to your financial aid department and ask them the questions. There's people in those departments in some organizations now, especially there's a lot of financial literacy and debt default individuals out there that their one main job is to make sure you don't default on your loans. So you want to make sure you reach out to their department, the financial aid departments, and ask those questions and ask any doubts you have. They may not be able to help you apply for the PSLF program, but at least they can answer any other questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then, kind of related to, I know you shared the resource of the studentaid.gov website, but are there other resources that you think can, help our audience with PSLF and navigating that whole process?
Yeah, absolutely. There's another website currently out there, and they're fairly new. But if for those actually that are looking for PSLF jobs specifically, there's actually a company that came out called pslfjobs.org or .com, and their website actually is kind of like an Indeed kind of search engine where you can actually search for whatever you're looking for, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in a university, a professor position, let's say, or an assistant professor position, and you can actually search that web page, and it actually will give you jobs that are just public service loan forgiveness. So they're kind of telling you this job that you're applying to will qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So I think they are actually a great resource. They're fairly new. I think they've been on the market for maybe at this point, maybe a year or two. But again, I think it has to do with a lot with the fact that public service loan forgiveness is getting a lot of traction these past few years. And of course, the main thing is if you are currently at an institution and you are already working, and like Emmanuel and myself that did full-time work and did our doc work, find out from your own institution, do you qualify where you're at now? Are they a 501c3? Are they a state, local, or federal institution? And get that paperwork rolling. So I think it's also using the resources within your employer if you're already working.
Great advice. And I think too, for our doc students who are, or maybe you're already done with your doc program, you might be looking for opportunities, and this might be a strategy for you too, to pursue an opportunity with an organization that would help you to qualify for the PSLF. So definitely a strategy for knocking out some of these loans, especially if you have a lot, right? And so doing your due diligence and going to the website, making sure that the organization that you're considering would qualify, or the organization that you're a part of, and going forward based off of that. This might also be a good strategy too if you're thinking about job searching, and maybe you go through the process and you see that you only have 12 payments left. So then you might say, you know what, let me just stay here for a little longer while I navigate this whole process, before you leave. So that was just random thoughts as you were talking. So Alberto, future Dr. Diaz, I have enjoyed this conversation. It's been great and a breath of fresh air to kind of talk about a topic that goes across the board for doc students. Grad students also listen to this podcast too, not just doc students, and even undergrads who can benefit from this whole conversation. So I appreciate you being here. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how folks can stay connected with you, or maybe ask you any questions after hearing you on this podcast?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, it's an honor to be here. And I think again, to echo your point, PSLF jobs, I think this is some great information that I think everyone should hear. So I think anyone should share this information with friends, family, colleagues. Not too long ago, I think I shared it with professors here, and it's a lot of great information. I think again, a lot of people can benefit from it. So if you do have any other questions, or if you have any other concerns, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn under my name, Alberto J. Diaz Jr. And you can definitely add me, send me a message if you want. If you have direct, specific questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those for you. You also can email me at my email at ajudiaz, Diaz at fiu.edu. And again, if you just shoot me an email stating that you heard it on the podcast and you had a few questions, I'll be more than glad to try to help you as much as I can and walk you through the process.
Great. Thank you so much. And per usual, I will add all of that information to the show notes. I'll also add links to the resources that you share too, so that folks can go ahead and navigate those sites. And again, thank you so much, Alberto, for this conversation. This has been great and eye-opening, and I'm excited to restart my whole process again, since I got, kind of deflated by the whole thing. So I appreciate this conversation. I'm sure the audience does as well. And thank you for being on.
We can definitely work on it, no problem. And it's been a pleasure being on here. And if anyone needs any help or support, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be more than glad to help you out. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, rate the show, and leave a comment on Apple Podcast. You can also donate to the show by clicking the support link in the show notes. Your donations help me to continue to put out new episodes to help support you and other women of color doctoral students. I'd also love it if you could spread the word to other women of color doctoral students to grow our community. Be sure to also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emanuela. That's DrEmmanuela. See you on the next episode.